and welcome to the LatentBridge Blueprint, a show from LatentBridge where we move beyond the hype and into the strategy of enterprise transformation. I'm your host, Ashwini, Senior Marketing Manager at LatentBridge, and I'm thrilled to be your guide as we sit down with the industry's most impactful voices. Our goal here is simple: to get the blueprints, the things that slow firms down, speed them up, or quietly shape the partner experience in most ways people never really notice. Well, at Latent Bridge, we've spent a lot of time helping firms clean up everyday workflows, the ones everyone often complain about, but no one really has the time to fix it. Intake, onboarding, KYC, conflicts, all those tiny steps that somehow take forever. And today's guest has lived inside those realities for more than 16 years. If you've worked in legal innovation, you've either met her, read about her, or been influenced by something she shaped. She runs TLW Consulting and previously worked with Ashurst as the Chief Digital Officer. Please welcome Tara Waters. Tara, I'm really happy you're here. Thank you so much. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Perfect. Let's dive deep right in. So firstly, we have seen partner life evolve up close. What feels most different today from when you actually started?
I think there's probably a lot that's different, but from our perspective, there's been such a huge change, especially over this past decade in the legal industry. And I think what we've really seen is the partner role has evolved immensely. And there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot now on a partner's plate. So not only do they need to be, high technical lawyers with great client relationships, delivering great service, they now need to be thinking about technology, which is for probably a lot of lawyers a completely foreign topic. And to be in the position to have to be thinking about how do I use technology to deliver my services, because that's what the industry is demanding, I think is a huge change. And that's something that we're seeing happily a lot of partners really embrace. But by the same token, they still need a lot of support because the technological change is happening so quickly.
Absolutely. So with all of those changes, where do you see partners lose most of their time? Not the strategic big moments, but the small, tiny everyday frictions.
To be honest, it's the accumulation of those everyday frictions. We operate in this industry, to use broad brush strokes, not every organization and every team is the same, but for the most part, there is an incredible amount of friction in the day-to-day life of a lawyer and of a partner. And that's in part because you've got teams that are geographically dispersed. You've got teams that are physically dispersed. So you are trying to connect and leverage resources and team members that you are not there sitting with you, which was the way it kind of operated in the old days. And then you're using systems that are very disparate and disconnected. And so, one of my biggest bugbears when I was a partner was just the fact that in a lot of my systems, had to type my own name. It made me crazy. I just was like, why am I typing my own name or my contact information into my own firm's systems? So
Yeah.
I think it really is just those small annoyances, but in their accumulation, I think they lead to significant productivity challenges when a partner is trying to context shift day to day, trying to juggle all the different roles that they have to play. For them
Yeah.
to hit any friction points genuinely has significant impact on their day.
True. All right, but what I really find fascinating is that many firms still treat all of these issues as ops problem, but the impact shows right up at the partner's desk. Now, what is real transformation, or why does the real transformation need to begin there?
Yeah, I think that, well, actually, I would say, and I've not sat in every law firm, but I think legal ops as a term of art, is actually more associated with in-house teams than it is in law firms. So, just to give you an anecdote, I remember one day, I don't know what I was doing. I was looking for some information on my firm's intranet, and I actually saw at some point a reference to contact our legal ops team, and I was like, what is this? I didn't know we had an internal legal ops team. Now, in reality, it was just referring to some of the business services teams that supported the firm, but that wasn't something we used internally. And I think therein lies the problem. I don't
Yeah.
think partners know necessarily who are the people that are in the firm that can help them solve different types of problems. So I think what you often find is a partner will become friendly with certain people in different business services teams who are friendly back and are helpful, and that just becomes their go-to person. So you might have a partner who just makes friends with someone that's in the service desk in IT, and they will go to that person for absolutely every question they have because it's a friendly face that they know is going to be helpful. And I think that is the real challenge is partners don't really know where to go to help get help with some of their problems. And what we have, I guess maybe probably we're seeing more of over the recent years, but probably not fully systematized within the way a law firm operates, is what you don't really have are teams of people whose job it is actually to go and sit with and understand what are some of the challenges that the partners are dealing with day to day, and then how do we start to build solutions around them that scale beyond that one partner. So you can identify those repeatable challenges that are actually common across the partnership or common across the firm, and then say, okay, let's solve this problem. How do we do that? Let's work together to build that solution. Tends to be a little bit too patchwork, and it tends
Mm.
to be trying to retrofit existing solutions to try to deal with problems. And what you end up having is a lot of people saying, okay, well, this is good enough, or here's my 27-step workaround to this problem because there's nothing that's actually been built for me to just deal with my problem head on.
Brilliant. Well, I feel like every partner has that one moment where admin isn't just annoying anymore. It actually affects the client conversation. What does that moment usually look like?
Yeah, I mean, it will most often be a client complaint, because that's when it becomes very obvious. So a client complaining that the invoice that came through, it didn't meet their requirements, or it was surprising, or it was late, didn't have the right information. Something just didn't go right with the client, and that's that moment, the partner dreads getting that email or that phone call where the client is unhappy. That is just absolutely the thing we do not want to ever have happen to us. And I think in that moment, whatever it is, and it can be something minute as, oh, you got the details wrong, or, what is this line on the bill that I don't understand, where the partner just feels completely at a loss. And, they don't understand typically what a lot of the back office systems look like or do, or why something appears. They're kind of just given these tools to use, and they are typically left unable to explain anything straight away if it's something of that nature.
Absolutely. Perfect. So let's now get into the concept of intake because that's where the friction usually starts, and it happens long before the relationship does. So we've seen intake take weeks when it should ideally take days. What's the most common underlying cause that you see? The simple thing firms that normally keep doing, but they keep tripping over.
I think probably the biggest delays are usually an email is sitting in an inbox, and it's double checking information, or there might be a potential commercial conflict as opposed to a legal conflict, and someone needs to just double check something with another partner to say, hey, this is happening, or hey, I need to just reconfirm these client details. Or it might actually even be, on the partner side where the partner needs to confirm something with the client itself, and just an email gets stuck somewhere, and in all the noise of people's inboxes, things just get delayed. And maybe that a partner or a client is in a meeting, for most of the day, and something just doesn't get responded to in time, and then it disappears in the noise of an inbox. Email traffic, I think, is probably one of the root causes of a lot of delays.
Perfect. So this is all, if you consider, it's a very invisible friction. It often occurs, but people all, doesn't seem to notice that. Now, where does it hide most inside the intake and onboarding journey? Let's talk about that.
I think with intake and onboarding, for me, the biggest challenge is often a lot of the key information exists, but it either exists in different systems or it exists in a partner's head. And you need to pull from all of those sources to create a collective view to be able to process the information and move things forward. And so, what you're trying to do is one, get a partner's focus enough to get the information out of their head, which is challenging. They're on the go. They've got a lot going on. They need to take the time to step back and say, okay, I need to relay this to somebody else, or I need to input the data myself, which in a lot of cases they don't necessarily want to do. They kind of want someone else to take this challenge off their plate. And then it's also cross-referring some of that information with the other data that exists that the firm has a lot of knowledge actually about their clients. But it's just cross-referring and confirming certain information, which again is challenging if the systems aren't integrated. They don't actually use similar data types and things like that, where it just makes it a lot more challenging. So you have to do manual checks around different interfaces as well as with people. So either you have the delay of trying to collate that information, or actually, I think what becomes the default position here and the default solution is input bad data to just move the process along. You just input something and you move the process along, but then what you have is, if that data is actually important in terms of reporting and understanding your client and the work that you're doing, now you have really bad data up front, and the time it takes to try to correct that, most people don't take that time.
Wow. Well, if LatentBridge, when we actually fix this for certain firms, it's rarely been a big system overhaul. It's normally just tightening off the handoffs or reducing approvals or giving partners something that feels more clean and predictable. Now, with that in mind, if a firm wanted intake to feel more effortless for both partners and clients, where should they begin?
I think it has to be at the start. And from my perspective, and I've heard some stories from other firms that have tackled this challenge as well, and have done some experimentation around how to best tackle it. I think it's starting with what's going to be the fastest and most streamlined way to get the information from the partner to kick things off. And so, for example, if your partners primarily use their mobile devices for when they're on the go, they're not opening their laptops or their tablets all the time. They're kind of on their phone. And I know so many partners that were like that. They do all of their communication on the phone. The laptop is for the work. Then you need a mobile app. You need something on their phone that works, and it needs to be short and sharp, because they are actually downloading and inputting that information in the cab, in between client meetings, on the go, walking down the stairs, trying not to fall down the stairs. They're moving around. So you need to really figure out, where are my partners working and what's going to be the most streamlined way to help get that information from them as quickly as possible to get the entire process kicked off.
Perfect. All right, so now let's get into the practical aspects of it. Let's talk about what this looks in real life. Now, give me a real scenario where redesigning a workflow genuinely shifted partner productivity. What actually made the biggest difference?
I think, to be completely honest, I think improvements of productivity are probably some of the toughest outcomes to come by. I've definitely think coming to mind are a few examples where partner productivity was negatively impacted. So I think probably the converse is true in terms of what would improve partner productivity. And I think it goes back to what I was saying around, what might be the starting point for intake and improving an intake process, which is actually really understanding how the partner works. And partners do work in different ways. That, as I said, there are some that may be very mobile device dependent, others that rely much more heavily on their practice support, secretaries, etc. So I think really it's understanding, what is that partner experience, what are their preferences, and then trying to design multiple pathways for them to get their work done. So to give you an example, I know of an anecdote where there was a rollout of a new system, and actually as a result, partners lost access to a key mobile app. And again, if they're the partner that's trying to do everything on their mobile, suddenly losing access to a mobile app is a huge productivity issue, because literally they're like, now I have to go be in a place where I have to open my laptop, have the Wi-Fi, all that sort of stuff. So I think it's I think the productivity experience is very much defined by the user experience. And so when that's not taken into account, and when you don't think holistically of, okay, we're going to make this change, we're going to make it easier for people to input time, for example, by being able to do that on the go as opposed to only on your laptop and in a web browser, for example. I think those are the sorts of things you have to think a little bit holistically. How are people interacting with this information? What are the different preferences? And let's make sure in particular, you're not changing something that removes capability and functionality. You should always maintain the status quo. And if for whatever reason you can't maintain the status quo, you need to communicate and over communicate the fact that that might happen. And the reality is disruption sometimes has to happen. And I think people will be understanding if they're aware that that's happening. But the one thing that partners don't like are surprises that suddenly impact their daily flow.
I agree. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay, let's say you have a magic wand. If you had the chance to rebuild one workflow from scratch, what's the first thing you'd fix and what?
I think that, well, so a little bit tongue in cheek, the entire client life cycle, matter life cycle, is the key workflow. But to be honest, that encompasses pretty much everything that it is that a law firm does, from the inception of the relationship to onboarding them as formally as a client to working on their matters and delivering matters. So I'll say that that's actually the workflow that I think firms should be focused on, but that does encompass quite a lot. I think one of the workflows that maybe doesn't get as much attention is actually employee onboarding. And I've worked in multiple firms and have had multiple experiences of that onboarding journey. And I have had much more positive and much more negative experience. And then, eventually as a team manager and partner, I had the experience of being a person trying to onboard. And that's the first touch point that you have with a new organization, someplace that in law, often people think, I hope to spend a lot of time working with this organization. And I think that sets the tone for what that person might expect in terms of their experience. And so I think that there's probably a lot that could be done to improve that experience so that that employee from day one feels really supported, feels like all of the information is available to them, and that they have a really clear picture of what they're walking into on day one. And I've definitely had experiences where, I've had to chase people to say, hey, I've got this person joining. They don't know what's going on. And I was like, and I don't know what's going on. I don't know either. So that's probably also a problem. I didn't understand the process. And, my future employee was kind of left in the dark. Like, I think I'm joining in 2 weeks. Am I meant to be doing anything? And that's probably not the best foot forward that you want to put.
Yeah, I'm sure that must be the most frustrating thing to do. Wow. Okay, so and then there's the classic tug of war, governance versus speed, especially in conflicts and KYC. Well, how do firms get this right without actually slowing everything down?
And I think the key thing is that it needs to be a balance, and you need to think about both of them. And so some of that is defining risk tolerances in terms of, okay, well, these are the minimum checks that need to happen. If there are enhanced checks, how can we phase that in a way that can make the process kick off and keep moving forward, rather than saying, okay, well, we're going to have to wait two weeks in total, probably a minimum, just in case there might be more enhanced checks, for example. So I think thinking about phasing, trying to figure out what's the minimum amount of information we need to get things moving so that everyone can see the progress, and then phase that in a way that doesn't increase risk, but allows the speed to happen. And I think, again, that's really working with the teams and talking to the teams to actually distill out. Yes, there's a whole list of questions and checks and information that could be sought out and brought in, and that you might ideally say, of course, we want all of this information, but what's the bare minimum to get started, to reduce the friction? And then let's think about how quickly can we get through those next steps.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Now, so actually, when we rebuilt an entire end-to-end intake journey recently, the biggest lift didn't come from AI or heavy tech. It actually came from removing two unnecessary approval loops and clarifying one decision point for partners. Well, the question for you is, what's one small operational change that gives you the biggest, fastest impact on something measurable, like, for example, time to build?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for something like time to bill, those when you're dealing with finances, law firms have particular requirements, that regulatory requirements that they have to meet, which are understandable. So I think again, really, it's the transparency that you could offer, I think. I think sometimes, again, lawyers are not, by definition, typically technologically savvy and knowledgeable. They kind of are just trying to use the systems as best they can. But I think what they often lack in a lot of systems is transparency. Where are we at in the process and what's missing? So that maybe they could be part of the solution of unlocking any of those blocks. So if they see, a process sitting somewhere with an approval person, or there's an open question, with the client, for example, they can actually be part of the solution and come in and say, oh, well, let me just accelerate that. If the finance team has reached out to the client finance team and it's been a few days, maybe the partner can just pick up the phone to clients, be like, hey, like, something's blocked on your end. Can we get through this a little bit faster? And sometimes that's all it takes. But if the partner isn't aware of where that bottleneck is hitting, they can't do anything about it, and they're completely in the dark.
Absolutely. Well, now let's talk about the elephant in the room, something that everyone's been trying to figure out, AI. So AI is everywhere right now, but useful AI is a much smaller category. Now, where does AI genuinely make sense for supporting partners today?
To be honest, I think it makes sense in tons of places. But I
Okay.
think in particular, one of the challenges as you get more senior, as a lawyer, but probably in other roles, as I said, you have more and more responsibilities, you have more and more pulls on your time and your focus. And so, when I talk to senior lawyers, fellow partners, even, clients and senior lawyers within clients, I often hear a common theme, which is like, I just want to cut through the noise. I've got 1,000 emails sitting in my inbox. I've got multiple deals and transactions going on. How do I know what's important for me to focus on in this moment? And how do I get to information as quickly as possible? They don't want to spend time hunting down information. So I think that ability for AI now and what language models can do, combined with other search methodologies, which isn't necessarily only using the language model, I think the ability to locate information from disparate sources of data and unstructured sources of data is really helpful. For a partner to be able to, for example, type into a Teams chat, because maybe there's a great AI agent in Teams available to them, to ask them a question: where are we at with this client? Get a status update around this matter, to find out, oh, okay, where are my billables? Am I close to targets? Just to get to some of that information, not just purely locating information, but also ideally something insightful that's actionable for them to know. Okay, there's emails that are showing me that there's a potential issue on this matter. I probably need to focus that, and now I need to focus my time there. I think being able to surface up those key pieces of information so the partner has a bit more directionality in their day instead of, again, trying to deal with all of that noise. I think from a partner perspective, that would be, a gold dust for them to really say, this is what you need to focus in this moment. This is what needs your attention. Everything else is secondary, so that they don't waste their time spending an hour just filtering through the emails, trying to figure out where do I go next.
Absolutely. Perfect. So actually, we've had firms come up to us and with tools particularly. So something that they bought during the excitement phase, we call, and many of them never really made it, after the pilot phase. Now, what's your framework for evaluating what's actually worth implementing?
Yeah, I think that seems to be a common challenge from what I hear, and I know there's some interesting statistics out there, though some of them I think are being a little overly broad. But I think, from my perspective, it's really essential that you go into these testing, assessment, pilot phases with a really clear goal in mind. So you do have to do a lot of pre-planning up front to say, okay, here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for certain types of capabilities, or I'm looking to test certain workflows or achieve certain outcomes, or I'm trying to prove or disprove a hypothesis about what this tool can do ultimately and what it's going to add. I think you need to have those, and then you need to think through, okay, how do I answer this question? What do I need to do? What people do I need involved? What types of testing activities do I need them to do? And then crucially, what feedback do I need from those testers to understand whether or not all of those tests and hypotheses that you've set up front. What was the outcome of that testing? And I think if you think about it in those three layers, you should walk out of that experience with really clear data telling you whether or not this was a good tool for you, or and what the potential value of that tool will bring if it was deployed in a broader context within your organization. And that's how I like to design a lot of my pilot experiences. I think that the sort of fourth thing that kind of wraps around all of that is, especially if you are testing with actual users, whether it's on the business services side or just with lawyers or a mix of both, is to make that experience as easy for them as possible. So I think it's really important to time box. So they're very clear, how much time am I required to spend and when does this end? So it's not just endless testing. It's not, hey, you have 6 months to play around with this thing, and being really clear about upfront that you expect them to give feedback, that you're going to give them structured ways to give that feedback, so that they know that that's what's going to be expected of them. And they can go into the usage knowing in their mind, people are going to be asking me what I think about the user experience, the usability, the speed, the accuracy, etc. So they have that in their mind as they're actually using and testing any tool. And I think that will then improve the quality of the feedback that you get at the end. And hopefully you can also make that a really fun experience. I always try to introduce challenges and make that a really fun and enjoyable experience where they get to see that as an opportunity to participate in the evaluation of the product and to be part of the decision-making process. And I think that agency and that accountability that then they get to take on in being part of the entire testing phase can be really impactful and powerful, and also can help if it ends up being a yes coming out of that pilot, and gives them kind of the ability to then be part of that first wave of people saying, hey, we were involved. We thought this was great. This was our feedback. We're behind this and we're supporting this. And you've got your first batch of positive users to help make the overall launch a success.
Brilliant. Wow. Well, then there is the responsibility piece. Everybody, especially in regulated environments, what does responsible AI look like in something like intake and onboarding?
Yeah, I think, I was having a conversation with somebody about this actually just yesterday, because responsible AI, I think, as a general proposition, has, 5 or 6 key principles that are pretty uncontroversial. But I think the concept of responsible AI in practice can be very different depending on whether you're building something yourself versus you're using a third-party tool. So I think it's very contextual in terms of what it is, what type of AI it is, how the organization is bringing it in, and then what you intend to use it for. So I think in the context of something like intake and onboarding, I think as long as it's not being used, for example, to evaluate, the quality of a potential client, where then there may be some bias that comes into that type of decision. There's a lot of firms that work with individuals, or I think there's elements of working with certain corporations that have certain policies. So I think what you really need to do is make sure that as long as if you're using it in really just a verification, fact-checking manner, I think then you just need to make sure that you've got, high quality data, accurate data, and that the people that are using it understand how the AI is being used and how the AI in particular is not being used. And if there's the potential for AI to be misused or to introduce risk or bias into the process, that needs to be thought about and communicated and discussed so that the users appreciate and understand what are the perimeters of how the AI should be used. And if there's any question, to always just escalate and ask and clarify rather than operate thinking, I think this might be okay. I think obviously in other contexts, for example, like in HR and recruitment matters, there's probably other layers that become much more important because, you want to be very, very much more cautious, I should say, I think probably in your AI use. But ultimately, I think a lot of it is just common sense, to be frank. And I think that's what sometimes we miss. I think sometimes we think, oh, there's all these requirements and regulation, and a lot of it boils down to common sense. And I think we also have to keep remembering that, With a few exceptions, most of the current and pre-existing regulation is what applies here. For example, there aren't a lot of brand new rules that either legal professional bodies or national regulators have actually imposed in relation to AI use. So it's ultimately just thinking through what you're planning to do, understanding the limits, and making sure that the people using the AI understand those limits too.
Incredible. Yeah. But that brings us to the real challenge behind all of this, people. All right. So Tara, from your experience, what's the hardest part of driving behavior change in a law firm?
Oh gosh, all of it is hard. All of it is hard. I mean, I often try to remind people like changing behavior is genuinely one of the hardest things to try to do. Doing it in a law firm environment, with the history of law firms, compounds the challenge for sure. And I've got this battle scars from that. But I think, to be honest, what I'll say is where I see in particular law firms and organizations really getting it wrong, and I'll be bold and say getting it wrong is around communication. Because I believe, and certainly in my experience in my previous firm, and certainly in talking to people at lots of other firms, I don't think lawyers are as change adverse as we like to say, as the narrative plays out in the industry. I think lawyers are actually very open to positive change that improves their experience. I think, unfortunately, over the past decade, we haven't delivered lots of positive change. I think we've introduced, a whole slew of new tools, thrown them at them, and been like, use these with very little support. And a lot of the times, those weren't necessarily the best tools for the job. So I think, where you can get it wrong is, not listening and understanding what people are doing and how they work, but in particular, the communication of it all. Because when you are trying to keep pace with what's happening in the world, that means there's lots of change happening all the time. And what you really need to do is provide comfort and give your lawyers confidence in what you're doing. And I think the best way to do that is to communicate. I think to let them know what's coming and when there's going to be challenges, when there's going to be hiccups, admitting when the hiccups happen because they will inevitably happen, and being open and listening and taking on board the feedback and not being defensive. The reality is nothing works perfectly. Nothing ever goes to plan. But if you are telling people what you're doing and why and helping them to understand and explaining the process as it goes and showing them that are creating a communication feedback loop with them, I think they will be much more understanding than we sometimes expect them to be.
Wow. Look at it. The hardest part is often the simplest part, communication.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Incredible. So once the change journey starts, how do you bring the partners and support teams along without triggering that resistance?
Yeah. And I think the key thing is bringing them along. So, one of the things that was always really important to me when I was within a firm and trying to lead projects was to ensure that I wasn't pushing forward anything that I wasn't very clear had the support of the teams that that project was meant to impact. So I think you need to really listen and gather information from people and get their feedback. What's not working? Where are their problem points? What types of tools are they interested in? You need to explore that with them. I think the experts in the firm who are tasked with this might do a bit of filtering in advance. But I think when it comes down to, okay, we've made a decision, we think we need to explore a tool that supports intake or a tool that supports this type of work, then you need to involve those people so that they can see with their own eyes and not feel like someone's making a decision without their input. And as I said, I think if they become part of that journey, they participate in the assessment process, they get their hands on those tools, have the ability to test them, try them, use them, give feedback, so that when that decision goes forward or doesn't go forward, they understand why, because they were part of the process and they don't feel like they weren't part of the decision making at all. And I think that's often, again, and it goes to communication to some extent as well. If they feel like decisions are being made without their input, they're sitting there wondering, well, I don't understand. I'm telling you my problems, but you're not listening to me. And I think the most important thing is they need to feel that they are in the driver's seat and that the problems that you're trying to solve are the problems they communicated to you. And sometimes there can be a mismatch in that. And I think it's always really important if you're trying to push forward any type of change initiatives, that it's come from the people in the firm. And it's not just something that a group of people sitting somewhere else and separately have decided are the right things to do. They need to be backed by the people that are actually impacted by them.
Incredible. Perfect. Yeah. So before firms even think about scaling automation, now, what are the non-negotiables that they need to set in place? Or is there something called non-negotiables there?
Well, I think the two things, right? Like you can't automate a process that doesn't exist, and you shouldn't automate bad processes, right? So,
I agree.
the non-negotiable has to be there needs to be a clearly defined process, and you need to relook at it. And I think, especially now, it's not simply automating the current process. This is the opportunity to reimagine and redesign that process with in mind the fact that we have access to all these new technological capabilities like LLMs and other AI and automation tools. So this is the chance to actually improve. And I always find it surprising when I hear stories about people saying, okay, well, let's just automate what we have first, and then we'll look at improvement. And I just think, no, like you are never going to get away from that poorly automated, bad process. Like it's because you often see a lot of projects kind of stall. You get that kind of that first burst of energy and then it kind of stalls. I was like, you're never going to get to improvement if you don't start with improvement. You really, in my view, you really shouldn't be doing anything if improvement isn't the number one outcome of everything you do in the first instance. And that has always been my stance. The absolute number one thing you should be delivering with any initiative, especially a tech-enabled initiative, is improving either or both the employee and client experience. If you're not doing that, I don't think it's worth doing.
Perfectly put. So before we wrap up this incredible session, I want to end with something light. So it's called a rapid fire. I'm sure you're familiar with it. So, all right, the fundamentals are simple, quick answers. You answer the first thing that comes to your mind. First one, biggest time waster for partners today.
Scheduling meetings.
I agree. One intake habit firms should stop doing immediately.
Stop asking questions that you don't use the answers for anything else.
Great. Conflicts, KYC, or sanctions. What slows firms down the most?
In my experience, it's KYC because often you need to go back to the clients to request information, and that will always slow down the process.
Perfect. Worst question you've seen on an onboarding form? I know you've
My own
answered this.
name, my own name. Anytime I have to fill in my own name.
Okay, so the next question for you is one metric that tells you a firm is running really well.
Probably employee retention.
Incredible. Most underrated role in legal ops.
The analyst. I think the person that can really get under the skin and draw the insights out.
Incredible. A tech trend that's overhyped.
Oh, agents.
Okay, a tech trend that deserves more attention.
Voice activation, I think.
Nice. One thing AI can never replace.
Experience.
Incredible. Most important behavior shift for transformations to stick.
Being open to failing.
Wow. Governance or data quality, which is harder?
Oh, data quality.
Uh, a quick win firms can implement this quarter.
Ask for feedback on the initiatives that they have brought in.
Nice. A misconception about partners that isn't true.
That they don't understand technology.
Uh, Incredible. One process every firm should modernize in 2026.
Intake.
Okay, and finally, your coffee order on a long transformation day.
Oat flat white.
Oh, interesting. Perfect. Then, Tara, firstly, this was such a refreshing conversation. And what stood out for me was that the firms don't usually slow down because of these big, so-called big obstacles. It's always because of the small ones that often go unnoticed, right, for too long. Well, if you fix those and suddenly partners move relevantly faster, teams work much more cleaner, and clients often feel the difference almost instantly. Well, that's a lot of what we do at LatentBridge as well. So we take the friction out of everyday work so people can focus on the part that they're truly brilliant at. Well, thank you so much for being our first guest. Tara, it was really incredible having you here with us today.
Thanks so much. It's been a great conversation.
Awesome. And to everyone watching, thank you so much for investing your time on this video. We truly hope this session was insightful. And until we see you in the next episode, thank you so much. Cheers.